Okay, so welcome everybody. Hope you're well. Hope everyone's fine during this time. And as you know, we've been hosting a lot of mobile London meetups, and I'll talk today from Neil Japhtha. Neil's an iOS developer. He's been doing iOS for I think around 5 years now. But for Neil, the guys who don't know about yourself, just a brief introduction.
Cool. As Tommy said, I'm a iOS developer. I've been developing for about 5-6 years. Before that, came into industry as a QA, and then before that, worked in a pub. I guess one thing for me is that I've not necessarily gone a traditional route for iOS, but worked in a bunch of agencies, had some pretty cool clients under my name. Currently working at British Airways. I think that maybe explains a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, we're going to go over a few questions now. As you mentioned, you didn't sort of come in the traditional route, as you said. So how did you sort of get into learning iOS? What sort of drew you to that in the first place?
So I was working in a pub originally, and my dad worked for a company called Oxford Metrics Group. And they specify and they basically do a load of work with camera technology. And at the time, they were trying to do a bit of wearable technology called autographer. You might be able to find some archives of that online. And they needed an intern. And whilst I was working in a pub, my dad basically got me introduced to like a role in a different department. He's in procurement, and this was as a QA. And I came in, and my job was basically to walk around London taking pictures with DSLRs, different types of cameras, and then testing against this new device. This is basically a wearable camera, kind of like a GoPro, but just takes photos. And the primary idea was that it would capture the moments that you would miss if you were to get your camera out and take a photo. And as a QA, my job was basically just to test various parts of the image pipeline, but then eventually moved into testing the iPhone app that would be paired with the autographer camera. And that started off as kind of like a manual testing role, so writing manual testing scripts. And then that developed into an automated testing role, and I had some support from developers that were there. And eventually, I started to pick up a lot of the technology that was around. So we used to have things like Google Glass hanging around. There was an Android app that was also supporting the autographer device. So I picked that up and started doing some minor bug fixing, and my boss kind of saw the interest that I had. And we were starting to move towards a V2 of this camera. So I started picking up some Swift development. And this is when Swift was in like, 0.5, Swift 0.5, not like a fully developed tool.
Yeah.
So I started just picking up a little bit of Swift development supported by my manager there. And I probably did about 3 months of it, came up with some concepts for what the app was going to look like, supported by the UX team.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a startup, it was very small, so a lot of opportunity to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the company then basically folded, right? So we had a company called Oxford Metrics Group, which was like an umbrella, and they decided to close the autographer arm for financial reasons. It's running a startup in London. You've got to be successful after a number of years for it to make some money.
Yeah.
And to want to keep it going. I got some redundancy money, so bought a laptop, a Mac, and I kind of decided, I quite like this iOS stuff. So I came up with a few proof of concept apps, like a few just kind of portfolio pieces. I haven't got a degree. I don't necessarily have the career to be able to go for like specific iOS jobs at this point. So I kind of just stuck my head down and built a few portfolio projects, and I sent them out to maybe 50 software firms
Okay.
at the time. And I got one response back, and that was from the first company I ever worked for, which was PageSuite. So I was living in Swindon at the time, commuting to London. And I hopped on the train, went up there for this interview. And whilst I didn't have like a huge amount of experience and, expertise in software development, they kind of saw my excitement for iOS at the time, and these portfolio pieces that they were able to look at code and kind of analyze. Okay, well, he's got some kind of fundamental basics here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the thing I learned from that was that for a lot of modern modern jobs, let's say for example, music production, software development. You can become a self-starter, but there's a lot of personal investment, time, and probably financial if you're buying yourself a laptop or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a really long-winded way of saying I basically taught myself iOS and got a job.
Yeah, fair enough. But yes, obviously you obviously went from one thing to the other, and obviously picked up iOS yourself, obviously with your passion. And then you mentioned you worked on your own portfolio. You got sort of a few things running, and then joined PageSuite themselves. How did you obviously find things going into that role? Was it a long sort of process, or obviously the senior portfolio? How did you sort of?
Okay, so their recruitment process was, at the time, I don't know what it's like now. It was very quick, so it moved fast. I went up there, and then I think I had an interview in like December, and then I started on like January the 4th or something like that.
Okay.
It was a face-to-face. You do answer some questions on a sheet of paper, and you show them a couple of projects, so they've got plenty of stuff to analyze. But after that, it was like cool. Within a week, that I knew I had a job lined up.
Yeah.
It was pretty much like, go move up to London, let's get going, do that. The job when I first started, well, I guess the first thing you kind of experience, and it's a very common thing in our industry, is like a sense of imposter syndrome. Like, I've only got iOS like knowledge for 3 months, or
Yeah.
or whatever, of self-taught, and you're kind of winging it and going off the feedback of the people that you're working with. So you end up putting it, like for me, I ended up just like grinding in hours of like, a bug would come in. It wasn't exactly agile. It'd be like, the client wants this, you go and do it, you fix a bug, and you just grind for hours and hours and hours. And at 8 p.m. at night, 10 p.m. at night, you go, I finally cracked it. And you learn from there. I think you describe it as a tactile learner, someone who learns by doing stuff.
Yeah.
That probably fits me. And I think that's the same for a lot of software developers that I can see. You have a lot of people that will read stuff, be quite theoretical, and there are others that just like to jump into stuff and see how things respond. Kind of like childlike nature when it comes to
Like
it.
trial and error sort of thing. Just keep doing it.
Yeah. I guess I'd be curious to know what kind of, you as a mobile specialist for recruitment, I guess I'd be interested to know what the kind of interest from companies to bring in junior and graduate developers seems to be. Because I know that there's certainly like a very high interest in having like mid to senior developers and leads.
Yeah, I think obviously everything, when it comes down to it, it's going to depend on the company and what they're ideally looking for. It comes down to what you're going to be working on and what type of role it is. Whereas some people look for someone who's maybe got a computer science degree, so that'd be like a graduate position. There's that type of candidate, but then there is, like yourself, someone who's got a bit of experience working on personal projects, someone who's ambitious, because it isn't all the time about that degree that you do have. It is, sometimes it does come down to seeing that someone has worked on iOS apps, they've been doing this in their spare time while working another job, shows that they're committed. And like you said yourself, you had sort of 3 sort of apps going on. And then they see that it's a way of them seeing your ability. At the end of the day, it does come down to like the company and the individual and how sort of driven they are and
mm,
sort of how much experience that they do have.
mhm,
Like I said, one company would be willing to train you, whereas one company may like to see that
mm,
you've got 3 months, you understand Swift, or you
mm,
understand a bit of Objective-C.
mm,
So obviously there's different companies that still work with legacy code, ones that are using the latest tech. Obviously with
mm,
yourself, you said you had a bit of Swift knowledge. When you went
mm.
into sort of page Swift, was that Swift as well? Was that Objective-C? Was that something
Yeah,
you picked up?
you know what? They were specifically hiring for Swift developers, which there were none on the market. So it made me, I suppose, a selling point at that time.
Mm.
Um, and they were doing a big refactor of their biggest client, Newsday's mobile app, from an Objective-C app to a Swift app.
Okay.
And I suppose a takeaway from that would be, if you want to make yourself desirable, it's to pick up technologies which are moving in direction. So I suppose, like, for a new developer now, I would probably recommend looking at Swift UI as
Yeah.
a pretty high priority, because I'm now starting to see a lot more of that
Coming out.
now coming into the industry as a desire for what we want.
Yeah, obviously that was announced last year, wasn't it? The new Swift
Hmm.
UI. Well, what are your sort of thoughts on that? I've obviously spoken to some companies who are looking to use it in the future. A lot of developers are keen to use it. What's your opinion on that one?
You know what? I think the move towards declarative UI is where the whole industry is going. So has a
Hmm.
similar style to Flutter,
Okay. Yeah.
and I guess the closer we can get to people being able to hop between different languages and code bases, the better. I think it reads well. I think at the moment it's not going to be picked up now thoroughly for another few years. So much
Hmm.
like we saw, say, for example, Swift. The move to Swift was it took maybe about 5 years to come into more predominantly Swift code bases,
Properly.
and even
Yeah.
still now there's like Objective-C
Mm.
hanging
Yeah.
around
100%.
quite a lot. So with British Airways, we're operating in an environment where we've got 10-year-old Objective-C code, and there's also more. We move towards Swift whenever we do build something new, but you have to kind of understand what your requirements are for a task that you're doing before you decide to do write something in Swift or carry on with the Objective-C.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that stuff will continue for a
Yeah.
while. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, certainly the move towards Swift UI, I think, is important, and it makes things a little bit more uniform.
So definitely something maybe worth looking into over the next few years for people if they're looking
Mm,
to speed this up. Definitely worth something to
sure.
sort of take and bear in mind. Yeah, so I think the next question I'll probably have yourself within your career, obviously being self-taught, is there any sort of struggles you've sort of had, like when applying for roles? What sort of things have you come up against and sort of overcome?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, I guess, when I first started off going for an iOS job, it was whatever one I could get.
Yeah.
And probably similar approach to the next couple of roles, maybe. It was kind of just trying to go to something new.
Mm.
I would say for the follow-up role after that, which I believe was for a company called Fat Unicorn,
Yeah.
which is a small digital agency in events. And I think for me, struggles I found were when applying for places, you might get ghosted because because your experience, isn't what people desire. I only had 2 years experience then, and to be honest, the amount of callbacks then I wasn't getting a lot after 2 years
Yeah.
of Swift experience. Um, I think other things for me are it's really competitive. So you do have a lot of people with the 5 to 10 year experience, especially contractors. And so
Mm.
if you're someone with 2 years trying to go against that, you might not have, those roles which are more like maybe for a mid-level developer, which are hitting like a 50K mark. They won't really be available to you. So I certainly had to aim for like the lower band of pay at the time. Um, I also learned that I think I had to like cater my CV for the client.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
say for example, I was going for, I did a role at Made by Fire, and which was an agency, and they mainly had a client that were doing an IoT product,
Okay.
and Bluetooth was a core part of that. I had minimal Bluetooth. In fact, I had some Bluetooth experience at this point from Fat Unicorn. So highlighting that stuff on my CV was really important, and making sure that they're aware of that. So it's nice to be able to draw experiences from different things that you've done.
Yeah.
I suppose if I was someone that was kind of looking for my first or second, maybe even third role now, I would be trying to pick up as many newer frameworks, whether it be Swift UI, whether it be something to do with AR, maybe more of the Apple TV stuff. Basically trying to branch out on making yourself more sellable in a way, getting a wider range of experience. One thing I also found as a problem was the tests that I would come into might differ from company to company.
Yeah, definitely.
So like one company might take you through just an online platform where you answer a bunch of questions. One might be, hey, we want you to do this test. One I turned up for and they didn't give me any information as to what I was doing, and suddenly I'm in a meeting room trying to basically draw out a technical design for a payments platform, which I'd never done at the time, and never had I guess what I felt was I'd never had the opportunity to research that. And you can get a bit blindsided when it comes to that. So I think being informed as to what you're doing before is helpful. Equally, from an employer's perspective, I think it's their due diligence to make sure that they know that you might be prepared for that role. So I guess in that case, before I turned up to the interview, it would have been nice if they had asked me, hey, have you got much experience in payments? In which I would have said no.
No, so they understand the test could have been sort of your ability sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or I just wouldn't be invited for the second interview. I think one of the other issues that I've definitely come across is you get given tests, technical tests, which take maybe 3 days sometimes, and they'll say on them, it should take 4 hours, and it's like a 3-day thing to really get it up to where you want it to be, because everyone takes a little bit more time because they want it to be perfect.
100%.
And there have been, I think, an issue with this is you can spend 3 days on something and not have proficient feedback. I do actually have an example here, which I'll come up to later, of what I received as good feedback from a company. But and I guess one thing that I eventually also learned to look at was Glassdoor do like a section where they show technical interviews. So they let you know this company did this type of interview, this company did this type of interview. So you can almost like preempt what you're going to get. So you can prepare a little bit, do your homework. Equally, a recruiter's a good source of knowledge. If you're going through a recruiter, they can be like, okay, well, this is the stuff you're going to come up to. These are the things that people struggled with, or this is specifically what they're looking for. And that helps both sides.
Obviously, a lot from a recruiter's side, they probably have other candidates or even a different section of the business, so they know what they obviously look out for, what sort of people have fallen back on before, and they can give you that best knowledge. I didn't actually know about the Glassdoor thing. That's a new one for me. I didn't know that they have something like that. You mentioned there obviously towards the end as well, feedback. So over the times you've been interviewing, you've had positive, negative feedback. How do you sort of take feedback on board? Like you said, you got some positive feedback before from an employer. How did that help yourself? And
so I think some of the core problems with the feedback that I have that you can get, if you're applying for loads of jobs, you have to deal with a lot of rejection, or you might have to deal with a lot of rejection. You might just be perfect. But and you might be, as I previously mentioned, you might get ghosted. Those both suck. Rejection's okay if there's thorough feedback. So certainly, like so the example I got here is actually from Just Eat, right?
Okay.
And this is from like 2016, 2015. And what they've done is they've highlighted a few good things, and then they've gone into, okay, these are the things you want to improve. So I guess the example here I've got is they've said, hey Neil, both test, task, and the question answer, they're good. They don't present any errors, or at least any major errors, right? So that's kind of nice, a little bit of feedback. you didn't try too bad on this. Then they go to okay, here's the things you can improve, and they say this lacks utility of solid principles. So what they've done is highlighted a specific problem, which I as an individual can go in and then address. And they've even gone into detail to like specifics. So let's say they say it lacks utility of solid principles. I might be like, oh, I don't really understand what that means. But they've gone in and they've said more specifically. In particular, there was a lack of design around view controllers, and they simply handle too much work. The FB table view controller doesn't provide the logic for displaying the data, which is implemented in the subclass, blah, blah, blah. What that allows me then to do is see specifically what the issue is and address that and learn for next time.
Yeah.
In And Digital, which is the agency I work for now, we have a culture of really drilling in feedback and doing it a lot. So one of the things we'll do when we first get introduced to the company is a session called Feedback 101. We do like a little boot camp. And as part of that, they provide a framework, which I think is really common, which is the STAR framework. So situation, task, actions, results, and resolution, right? So the idea here is that if you're going to give feedback to someone, if you're going to receive feedback, ideally it's in this format. And this Just Eat example applies some of that. So they've got the situation. They're like, okay, in this view controller, this is what you're sorry. The situation is you've done this test. The task is the test or application that I had to make. The action here that I've done is that I've made this table view controller a little bit too heavy, a little bit too blurry, and they've said, okay, well, this as a result makes it not really easy to read, and it's not solid, basically. And then they say, as a resolution, you can look at solid principles. You could try separating these view controllers out into view models. And that gives me a really great starting block to move on and progress myself. I've tried to skim this down a little bit. So I think I think STAR is a good framework. I go for 3 points. Just make a clear delta, which is this is the specific issue. What's the impact of it? Because of this specific issue, your code is going to break in this position, and suggest a route to resolution. Why don't you try applying the solid principle? So I think for me, having like a well-formatted set of feedback helps me as an individual. It's also good for the company from a reputation standpoint. So yeah, I think for me there's a bunch of stuff around that which I think a lot of companies don't do. I've certainly had it where I've spent a bunch of days on a test and I've been ghosted. And equally, I've been there's also an air of subjectivity sometimes. So in software development, we've got about 10 ways of approaching one single problem. Say, for example, architecture. A lot of people will say MVC, MVVM, Viper, etc. These can all handle different issues, but sometimes it comes down to a preference, what people are used to, what people want to see. And there has been definitely cases of that for companies. So I think trying to make feedback as objective as possible is very important as well.
Yeah, I think it helps both people. Like you say, it's good from the company side of view, and it's good for the developer as well to obviously understand where they can improve sort of going forward. They might not be the right person for that company, but at least they'll know what they have to do for next sort of tests and things coming up. Obviously, with yourself being at Digital now, obviously 5 years experience, do you get involved with interviews? Have you interviewed over the past different candidates? How have you found that, and have you sort of used your approaches in things, or how you find it interviewing people?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of technical interviews, certainly for contractors that come in. Yeah, it's the same approach. Our technical interviews are chats with when it comes to contractors.
Yeah.
because you rely on a little bit more of the wealth of experience that they've got and the feedback that they've had from other clients. And usually you need a contract for them quite quickly. So I think there have been cases where we've rejected a potential candidate, and it's the same thing. It's like I would definitely structure it like, hey, look, these are the things that are great that you've done. These are the things that I think maybe don't suit our environment. Could be experience things like
Yeah.
British Airways, for example, have like a quite a big checklist of things that they want from a developer. And as the agency or professional services here, we try and make sure that we bring in the kind of cream of the crop for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and feedback isn't, it's not necessarily things you can improve. Sometimes it is an experiential thing. It could be that, hey, look, we're looking for more people from a previous travel company. It could be that we want people with more networking layer experience, and that's so yeah, you need the right people in for the job sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Yeah, I think that sort of answers it from that side. I think obviously throughout this talk, you've sort of hit a good few points, especially for people who are maybe coming from the same sort of background, who are sort of learning iOS as sort of like a passion at first. And I think it sort of helps them understand how, well, obviously building a portfolio and things like that definitely help when sort of interviewing and trying to get on that first role. Yeah, I agree with sort of the points that you say with feedback. Obviously helps the developer, and is obviously good for the company as well, because at least then it tells them how they can obviously improve. But yeah, Neil, I want to say obviously thanks for taking sort of the time out today. Really appreciate that. Obviously, yeah, I'll share this with the guys so they can sort of see this and watch this back. But yeah, we want to say thank you, and yeah, obviously take care and all the best.
Nice one, mate. Catch you later.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, mate.